It's the AskJP podcast with jpmorrell. Now, let's start the show. Here's JP.
Welcome to the AskJP podcast, where we tackle the important issues of the day. October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and we are so excited to have with us Representative Aimee Adatto Freeman, who is a outspoken advocate on this issue, as well as a host of other women's and reproductive rights issues, as well as a constant advocate for children and the underserved in the state of Louisiana. But today, we're going to talk about breast cancer awareness. I could read your personal story, Aimee, which is kind of creepy because you're here. Yeah. So I'm not going to do that. Why don't you tell us about why you're such an outspoken person on this issue, and maybe your personal story about kind of what's going on in your life and how you got there.
Okay. Well, and thanks for having me, JP. I'm thrilled to be here and be on the podcast. So I appreciate you putting focus on this. And, you know, for me, this breast cancer journey was a bit of a shock because I really have been fine and healthy up to this point. Mm-hmm. And right after session ended in June, I called my doctor because I had felt a lump in my left breast. And I said, I have this feeling that I have this lump. And she said, well, I need to see you. So I went in to see her, at which point they ordered a biopsy. And many people have had biopsies before and they come back negative. So it doesn't mean you have cancer just because you have a lump. Right. So I think I was floored when June 19th, I got a call from the hospital that did the biopsy saying, you tested positive for cancer, you have breast cancer. And it, I kind of remember fully being in shock at that moment. Yeah. But I will say, shortly after that, by mid-July, I was having, my first chemo treatment. So it was an early catch. Mammograms are important. My annual mammograms in October. If I had waited till this October to have one, I probably would be in a very different situation. So if you feel something or see something abnormal, you got to call a physician and get a check. And so I feel really blessed and grateful that I figured this out early enough on, so my treatment won't be as intense as some others. But it's a very unexpected journey. And tomorrow will be my 5th of 6 chemos. And then, of course, after that, my prognosis is to have surgery and then radiation. So I won't be done when I graduate from chemo, but I'm on the path to graduating from chemo, which is a milestone in itself.
Absolutely. Well, let me ask you a question. So, because obviously, for those of us who have not had cancer, and I kind of almost say yet at the end of that, because it seems like everybody I know has some form of cancer.
One in 4 women get breast cancer. I think the stat is 1 in 4.
Yeah. So, maybe for those who have not experienced, my wife's a pediatric oncology nurse. I hear about it, what kids go through. I'm hearing about from you what adults go through, but maybe kind of give people an idea of what chemo's like. I think that would be helpful, just because I know that for people, I've talked to people who have obviously had cancer scares. And it's kind of amazing how people have a lot of preconceptions of what cancer treatment is like. And I don't think I really see a lot of opportunities. People have talked about what it's like to go through cancer treatment.
Yeah, it's very anxiety producing the first time you go in, for sure. And so it's helpful to talk to people who've had the chemotherapy before you to sort of prepare yourself mentally. But what I'll say is, for me, and I am doing my treatment at the Benson Cancer Center at Ochsner for my chemo, there are a lot of integrated services now available for chemo. So chemo itself is obviously the drips that you have to have of the medicines that are going to kill the bad cancer cells. But they have acupuncture over there, and occupational therapy, and an oncologist, nutritionist, and an oncologist, psychologist. So I feel very pleased with the fact that I'm in a cancer center where I have access to things beyond the chemo, because that actually means that I don't, every time I walk in that building, it's not like, oh, today I have to be in a chair for 5 hours and have a drip. And so that's actually changed my experience in a positive way to be able to have that. Like tomorrow morning, I go in at 8 a.m. and I have acupuncture before I even see my doctor and before I go to the chemo chair. And it is nerve wracking. And I mean, I will say, even though tomorrow's my fifth of six on my schedule, I always have a friend with me. My husband's also come with me. It just passes the time better to have a support system, sitting next to you. My sister has come with me. For me, that's been a huge way for me to get through the chemo is have somebody who's very close to me who will sit there and chat with me. But also if I want to close my eyes and take a little nap, they're like, okay, we'll wake you up in 15 minutes. Because what I don't want to do is sleep the whole time I'm in the chair because then I won't sleep when I get home. So for me, a big part of the experience is managing my day in a way that, I have something to do while I'm there. And visiting with a friend or a family member is a key, having that support system while you're actually waiting, because they have to change your drips depending on how many you have, so it's a day. And I've really liked the nurses that I've had over there. And I will say, I mean, your wife's a nurse. The care that you have from the nurses and is a big part of how you can get through it as well.
Well, I mean, I've heard that chemo treatment is tremendously exhausting. Mm-hmm. So how do you deal with the time when you're like not in the chair, when you're home and you're kind of doing the post chemo experience?
Yeah, I mean, I luckily have a very supportive husband. Our kids are always, all grown and out of the house at this point, so I don't have little kids to worry over. I've seen some of my friends go through cancer when they had young kids, and it's a lot harder, in my opinion, because being a parent is the hardest job I've ever had in my entire life. It's still, even though my kids are adults, I still am parenting them in some levels, so that's always been the hardest job. So I do have the ability to come home and take a nap, and I'm self-employed. I mean, I have my legislative position as well, but I have the ability to sort of really listen to my body. And I think if I don't like to nap because I'm actually one of those people who's always on, but it's a time when you're in chemo where you really have to say to yourself, wait a minute, my body is shutting down. Like there's a reason I need to just veg out, take a nap for 45 minutes or drink a cup of tea and sit on the couch and watch, an old episode of Monk, or some fun thing like Mary Tyler Moore. I went back and found the old Mary Tyler Moore. So and it's okay if you fall asleep watching Mary Tyler Moore because
absolutely.
But by the way, her outfits are fantastic. Like I'm like, oh my gosh, this one came out in 1970. I was 1 year old. Like I was a 1 year old. How great her clothes look.
I think it's important, and it's kind of like it's interesting that you had a very productive year in 2023 and 2024 when it came to, in 2023, you passed Act 294 that expanded Medicaid coverage to include T-cell therapy.
Yes.
And you did this before you even knew you had cancer. Like you were doing this as a legislator, promoting new types of treatment for people. What was that experience like? Because I know from my experience, whenever you're trying to expand any therapy, the insurance companies go batshit crazy. How were they this year? That year, sorry, 2023.
Yeah, so actually, I was working with a cancer advocacy group on that particular piece of legislation, and Dr. Matrana was the main doctor that actually came to testify, who treats people with that kind of cancer. And I mean, the fiscal note is everything, right? So I was really concerned that this thing wouldn't go very far because it might have too high of a fiscal note. Private insurance was already covering the CAR T cell therapy.
Wow.
His issue was that he couldn't offer it to his Medicaid patients. And so he felt like it was an unjust, way for him to practice medicine. So it is a very specific treatment for a very specific type of blood cancer. And not being a doctor, I don't want to say the wrong thing.
Right.
But not everybody is eligible for it. So the population who's eligible for it is small. And so that was actually in our favor to move the bill forward and get the coverage that it did. But yeah, that was a big success. And I believe the cancer advocacy group told me we might have been the first state to actually do that specific piece. And, it turned out at the time, one of our family members was actually going through cancer treatment, and I didn't realize what kind he had. And then his wife called me to tell me what it was and this therapy, and I was like, I know a lot about this. I'm actually on a bill for coverage now. That cousin of ours had a private insurance, so his
Right.
thing covered. But I was like, oh yeah, you don't even have to explain to me. Dr. Matrona has told me all about this. So, I think
That's so interesting, Amy, though, because like sometimes we don't, the layperson does not understand that like there are different layers of insurance, and that there are often things, because there's always the split between like Medicaid, the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, regular private insurance. There are all these layers of what insurance companies will cover and not cover.
Right.
And oftentimes in the legislature, part of our role is to go in there and just try to create parity, because it's just so bizarre. Because I mean, it must have been completely heartbreaking for that doctor to go, I know a treatment that can help you. It's helping these other people who are on private insurance, but because of you're a Medicaid patient, you get less options when there's an option out there. I mean, that's
Right.
crazy.
Right. And then that's one of the things I learned just working with some of these physicians, is that they know way more than I know. So I lean on them as the experts to lead me through the discussions and the process. And I mean, I've been also worked on reproductive rights, and, had many OBGYNs and emergency room doctors who see a lot of miscarriages come to me and explain all the problems there, right? So I'm constantly, even though I haven't had success with those bills, I'm constantly filing on behalf of their practice of medicine and the treatment of, women in pregnancies that need more, more help than we're giving them at this time. So
What a crazy concept to listen to doctors as a legislator.
Helene, as I've already told you, Helene and I kind of got both barrels over just collecting data on misoprostone, and I've had some really kind of crazy conversations. People are like, well, why are you doing this? And it's like, well, if you're right, and this bill that was passed, that was expanded at the last minute, isn't going to have negative outcomes, why are you scared about us seeing if the outcomes are bad? If you know the outcomes are going to be fantastic and no one's going to get hurt, why do you care if we collect the data? And what that kind of tells you in its face is they know the outcomes are going to get bad, and they just don't want the data to be out there. But I mean, that's kind of what we deal with. You also had a bill this year, which is super interesting to me, that dealt with preventing insurance companies from getting genetic information, which is crazy, which is interesting, because that is kind of, I think, what's imploded 23andMe. Because I know, obviously, if you've been following that, the 23andMe company is currently falling apart because their entire profit motive was to turn around and sell the genetic information. And a lot of different states and a lot of different countries are like, whoa.
That's not.
That's not. That was people who are signing up. It's bad enough or good enough, depending on what side you're on, that these companies kind of already share information with law enforcement. So, like, if your great uncle was at the scene of a murder, they can use your DNA to track him down or whatever. Which that's good and bad, I guess, depending on the crime, I guess, or how old or whether or not that's valid. But it is kind of insane that someone can go and like try to see if they're really from Ireland and then find out that they've been disqualified from their health insurance.
Yeah. And so that particular bill was dealing more with life insurance policies, specific. So some of the life insurance agents and whoever represents them in the Capitol were like, oh, we already have this law. And I'm like, well, no, that's not what I'm hearing. Like, what I'm understanding is that we need more barriers around, or, more boundaries.
Right.
Because what's happening is people want to get genetic testing to find out where do they fall in the spectrum of potential cancer, especially like, let's say your mom was a breast cancer.
Oh, that's even, so what you're saying is like people were using genetic testing for preventative care, and just by doing it, the insurance company could get what they are susceptible to and adjust or drop their insurance.
Well, and they do still have access to your medical records. So it's a little bit of a gray area about how far it goes. But what the law now says that we put into place in this year is that they can't increase your life insurance policies based on genetic testing. So that protection.
That's better. It's still kind of creepy, but it's better. It's better. But I mean, that's God. I can't imagine like being someone who's like, my family has a history of some specific type of cancer, and then trying to get genetic testing to do that, then find out that you've got some predisposition towards something that wasn't previously disclosed, and your insurance company being like, and that'll be 10% more.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right. And so that was also brought to me by one of the cancer advocacy groups. And we, as you know, because of your time in the legislature, we have several cancer advocacy groups working on lots of different issues that happen. And really, now that I'm a cancer patient myself, I feel that it's quite ironic. It's like that Mother Teresa quote, like, and I think it's something like this. If God trusts me, sometimes I wish he didn't have so much faith in me or something, because, she was always like helping the least among us, right? That was
right.
Like, it's like, I wish you didn't trust me this much. And so I kind of feel like with me and cancer, it's like, no, you have to experience this to actually know what else needs to be passed, right? So that has led me to some bills that I'm planning on filing, next year in the regular session, because I'm seeing and one thing in particular is there is a set of they almost look like oven mitts, they're gloves, and then there's these booties, and then you put gel packs in them to keep your hands and feet cold. Because there's certain chemotherapies, obviously you're putting poison in your body to kill things, but there's certain chemotherapies that have the side effect of causing neuropathy, right? So insurance doesn't cover this little kit that you can buy for $150 on Amazon.
Right.
And so why don't they cover it? Because one of my oncologists told me that she has a patient who was a truck driver, loved his job. He didn't buy the package of stuff because it was, maybe it wasn't in his budget. I don't know, and now he has neuropathy in his feet and he can't drive a truck anymore. And so he lost livelihood because of insurance not covering something that quite likely could have made his life, better at the other side of it.
But what's always crazy with insurance companies, and really it's like, really you're arguing them on the margins of like numbers, because for $150 for a patient for a treatment is literally it's amazing. It's beyond, it's like pennies. It's nothing. I mean, like when you go and get a test at a hospital for a treatment, let's say for just whether your primary care or your doctor, the sticker shock of those different tests easily outpace this. What's always crazy to me is that trucker who now has neuropathy, one, he can't do his job, but two, having the dead nerves in his hands and his feet, that leaves him more susceptible to other things that are covered.
Correct.
Like, I mean, if he gets injuries, he gets a cut or some kind of wound on his foot or his hands, and there's neuropathy, he may not detect it and it may get infected, and that is covered by insurance. And so, like, it's crazy. From when I was up there, when we were up there, it just was crazy because, like, you make these arguments with insurance companies and they go, yeah, but like that may happen 1 out of 3 times. So saving that 150 on 3 people when only 1 out of 3 will get an infection. It's like, what kind of weird panels do y'all have when y'all make these decisions?
Well, and not even per chemo. You buy the kit and you put the stuff in your freezer and then you bring it with you to chemo. So you can use, if you had 15 chemos, you could use the same kit over and over again, because it's just like, the gel packs you use after you're like, if you had a knee injury or your ankle, they're stuck inside of the mitt and the booties, and they're not touching your feet, but they're making them really cold, right? Because that's stopping the chemo from flowing to that area. And I have a friend who just finished a big round of, I think she had to have 16 total chemo, surgery, and then radiation.
Wow.
And she tried to donate her kit to the hospital, thinking like someone else could use it, but you're not allowed to do that either. So like, she was like, I don't need this anymore. I could donate it and help a patient who didn't have the funds to do it. Right. So yeah, that's definitely something that I want to file a bill to get that piece covered, because that's ridiculous. And the other thing that I learned that they don't cover is the cold cap therapy, which I've been using, which is a system that basically freezes your hair follicles, and you're connected to a cooler, literally, with this cap on your head. And I've been having, I know it's a 50-50 chance if it works or not. So perhaps that's why, and it's way more expensive than the neuropathy mittens and booties. But people really identify themselves a lot by their hair. So going bald and losing hair is very difficult emotionally. So, I think they should cover part of it or, reimburse pieces of it. I mean, it is something that I am investing in, with a decision with my husband that like, okay, well, we're going to spend the money on this, but, not even a lot of people don't have that option. And, I like to try to give people options. So that's another
man.
I've really been looking into. So those are two that are off the top of my head. And, as I talk to the doctors, I try to listen to them because they can, I mean, obviously they can't share with me specific patient names, but they can say, oh, we're seeing a trend in this, and it's because insurance won't cover fill in the blank drug, which we know is the right drug for that person,
No,
So,
that's super exciting. And honestly, it's like, I think that from my perspective, I remember like, for example, one of my kids was basically back when there was a spectrum for autism. One of my kids was on the spectrum, and we really got to interact with the autistic community and people who provide services. And I don't know if you remember this. We actually behavioral health, behavioral therapy. What is
okay.
it called? It's called
Cognitive behavioral therapy.
no, it's not called, but there's a type of therapy that is provided by line therapists to
Okay.
kids who are on the spectrum to basically help them like learn how to interact with other kids and basically kind of not autistic kids don't really assimilate into the population. It's not something that people want to do, but because obviously you want kids to be themselves, but basically it helped them kind of interpret dealing with other kids.
Yeah, social.
And what was crazy is when we first started looking into this, we found out it wasn't available in Louisiana. And it wasn't available because these line therapists who were interacting with a specific type of, it was behavioral analysts. Behavioral analysts did this behavioral therapy, and psychologists across the country were dramatically opposed to it because psychologists had a chokehold on therapy for any type of autism therapy. And they had systematically blocked Louisiana from having access to behavioral analysts and therapy. And so basically, I had to go to war with all the psychologists in Louisiana in order to get this therapy allowed. And it took like 2 years. And honestly, it was a combination of my own experience. One of Valerio's grandchildren or nieces or nephews had a similar experience. So like John Hilario and I put together a board and basically forced this through. And now it's like this type of therapy that's done by line therapists and behavioral analysts. It's pretty like commonplace across the entire country. There's whole like different centers in Louisiana that do it. It's very commonplace,
Right.
but it took one of us as a legislator having the experience and interacting with that part of a medical or medical adjacent profession to go, wait a second, what's wrong here?
Right.
And it kind of goes to that underlying issue that we see all the time, which is that you really have to have a diverse body in the legislature to have those kind of experiences. Because if every legislator was an independently wealthy person who didn't even need insurance because they paid for their own health care, if they were people who just didn't have any of these experiences, none of these issues would ever be addressed for the most part.
Well, a lot of them are independently wealthy, as you know.
I
and
mean,
don't-
yeah, a lot of them are.
so we do end up in, weird discussions in there. And as
Do you remember, like, to that point? Sorry to interrupt you. That was like that moment when I was trying and failing to do diapers that you actually did, but I had that weird conversation with Sharon Hewitt where we're talking about diapers.
Oh my God!
About
Yes, I remember
making it,
this.
and she said, well, why don't they just use reusable diapers? And I was like
the diaper delivery service of the 19th.
no. She was saying like they should wash diapers and just
Like
reuse
cloth
them.
diapers. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Cloth
what I-
diapers.
the old times delivery services.
Right. And first off, it was like bizarre because like I was like, I am getting this level of skepticism on diapers from a woman who has had children
Right.
and did not use disposable diapers, by the way. And two things. First, I was like, Catherine and I actually had those like cloth diapers. We're trying to be environmentally conscious, and they are a friggin' nightmare. Number one, but number two, I want to say it was Alice Glenn from the Junior League with me, and she was like, "Yeah, you can't send cloth diapers to a nursery. Like when you go to childcare and you bring your child, they require you to provide diapers, and they don't give you." And it was like a weird, like Sharon tried to argue with us for a second, then gave up. But we're kind of like, no, like you're missing the point, which is that part of the having the access to diapers is that even if you can get free childcare through some mechanism or system, you still have to send the diapers with the kid. Yeah. And there were literally parents that the Junior League found that like they were like stealing diapers from the supermarket so their kids could go to childcare. And to your point, like that was that jarring moment where I was trying to like explain something, and this person who had never had to worry about purchasing diapers, rather than try to like see the perspective of the advocates, she was like, "Oh, cloth diapers will solve that. I just made that up. Everybody should buy cloth diapers and wash them at home."
Yeah.
And if you didn't have someone advocating a different experience, that would have been the weird solution. Like, we're only going to make cloth diapers tax free.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you think that, we are kind of talking about how experience informs our work product now that since you've had previous legislation dealing with cancer and now that you are, battling cancer yourself, do you see this informing your legislative approach, philosophy moving forward? Like, I know so often we see legislators pass bills that they don't know shit about, and now you are very uniquely informed about breast cancer. So how do you see that, moving forward into the 2025 session? And just,
I definitely think it'll impact the way I speak about it for sure. Because if you have the experience with something, I'll use dyslexia as an example. When Joe Marino was up in the Capitol, he worked with Dr. Laura Cassidy on several dyslexia pieces. And I would co-author all those with him because my husband's dyslexic, my brother's dyslexic. I have 2 children of my 4 who are dyslexic. So that informed my experience a lot. So, as I move forward, even if I don't sponsor the bill, I've worked, Kirk Talbot, I think, has done some breast cancer bills. So is, I think it was Senator Price, who I carried the bill on the floor for him last year that was expanding access to certain tests for people who have dense breasts. And, I remember presenting it on the House floor, and Raymond Cruz from Bossier was really like asking me questions about like, "Oh, do you know that radiation can cause breast cancer?" Blah, blah, blah. And I literally stood up at the front to make my presentation, and I'm presenting Senator Price's, I think it was Senator Price's bill. I'm trying to remember his bill. I can't recall whose bill. I might have it wrong, but I was carrying a senator's bill. And I thought, I cannot believe this man is asking me this question. So I just lit into I just said, Representative Cruz, I have many friends who detection is how they knew they had breast cancer. So if this expands the amount of tests that can be available to women when they go to get I don't know anything about the study you're talking about, but I'm going to tell you, and of course, everybody but 8 of them voted for.
Right. It's the same people who think that COVID was a hoax.
Well, and he was sending me texts the next 3 days, linking me to all these Twitter accounts, and I was like, okay, I'm not even no response on this one.
Jesus.
So he really believes that. He really believes that women are.
But Aimee, that is a problem. That I will say this because I had the fortune of coming in 2006, Blaiko's last term, when the old guys were leaving and the new guard was coming in. Mm-hmm. I've seen the wave of crazy that's taken over the Capitol. Because it started as an ebb where it was oh, you just got Alan Seaball. There's that one crazy guy over there being crazy. And now he's got friends. That group has expanded over time. And things that used to be so basic. Getting the measles vaccine. Things that were this is something that's been proven over 60 years to prevent children from dying. Now it's but does it? I follow this influencer now on TikTok who tells me that us giving vaccines makes everyone die immediately and join a cult. There's this weird groupthink where like they think by showing you this, like they don't have actual science. They have random crazy people on the internet who say crazy and they cite you to their crazy, but all the crazy people are quoting each other. So whenever you follow that thread too long, it loops back to the first person. Like I read a study that said that this vaccine makes your head shrink. And then you go through the internet trail of it, and it comes back to the original person who was quoted as an authority by 4 other people that person now quotes. But it's like, it's scary that they. I mean, like to the audience out there, the people that really believe this, they really believe it. Like they really.
He wasn't joking when he said that. And actually, when I went back to my desk after I presented the bill, I can't remember who it was. I think it was a Republican woman. Yeah, who sits near me. She's new this term. Who was like, "Did that just happen to you?" And I was like, "Yes, it did." And she was like, "You handled that so nicely." And I was like, "Well, it's not a good idea to scream out curse words when you're in the front of the house."
Generally, yes, yeah.
Believe me, I was biting my tongue and the senator.
But that's what makes you a veteran legislator.
The bill for, actually, I think it was Senator Boudreaux. Now, didn't his daughter die of breast cancer?
Yes.
Okay, it was Senator Boudreaux. Now, it's like I just couldn't remember, but because I had helped with some funding for some breast cancer testing down at LSU when I first got there, the lobbyist who was working on that particular bill was Senator Boudreaux.
Recommended you.
Yeah, Gabrielle. She said, I think this on the floor. So he was. I went over to the Senate side to go chat with him after it was done, and he was like, and he had this young man who was like, we know how y'all have on the Senate side, you always have
or aides.
Yeah. So the college student was some son of a doctor from his, somebody that, and they had been watching it on the computer, and they were like, oh. He was like 20 and a college student, and as a son of a physician was like, what? That's what happens over there in the house.
Yep.
It is when people, I think people think that kind of nonsense only happens at the national level, and it's much more prevalent at the local level. I mean, it's crazy to me how people will just go down these rabbit holes of insanity. And that's why I always get crap from Monet because I'm always talking shit about social media. But that's part of why I do it, because these crazy people, they find their own little tribes of other crazy people.
Yep.
And it just becomes a hive where they all just say, you know what, that crazy idea you have, not so crazy. Hey, if like the idea that if you use radiation to detect your breast cancer, it's what causes the cancer, like that kind of logic. It's like, so the solution is just pretend you don't have it and hope it works out. Like,
question mark?
Don't have an annual test, So I mean, it's the echo chambers inside of social media are very scary, and my kids are all, you still have to raise yours through teenagehood. It grew from my oldest child who's 36 to my youngest who's 23. So I saw an increase over time between the four.
It's way worse now.
Yeah.
I mean, Aimee, when I tell my kids, they're like, when did you first get a cell phone? I was like 2002. They're like, what? And I was like, it was 2002, was my second year of law school, and it's because the law firm I worked for required me to get one so they could call me. And it was, and I was like, that cell phone was like a friggin' box.
What kind of cell phone was it?
I think it was a Nokia. Everyone had Nokias. Nokias were like it was a shitty little Nokia, but it was just crazy because it's like, I appreciate technology. Everyone in my office knows I love technology, but my biggest issue is like, it's just so crazy. You can't cut that shit off. I mean, it's on all the time. And I mean, for me, I've gotten better about it because I have kids and I'm trying to do a good example, but like, and now we're totally running a field of what we were talking about, but it'll loop back, I'm sure. I'll pull a Donald Trump weave, Monet, where like I'll talk about everything and then I'll bring it back.
Yeah.
But it's like, the amount of just nonsense, like when did y'all see that coverage of the TikTok disclosures in the lawsuit about how like they have the exact number of videos it takes on TikTok before you get addicted if you're a teenager or younger? It's 260 videos apparently is when you get addicted to TikTok. Like internally they were talking about it. But to your point, because I'm weaving it back Donald Trump style, if you have that many bad videos with bad information and you're feeding it into young people's brains, they don't have the background, whether it be from their family, from their peers. Let's say you're in an area where there are not a lot of people who have a high level of education. You could really take some crazy and just inject it into young people's veins at a very young age and shape how they develop as a person. It's kind of crazy. I mean,
it's just scary because if they're in that echo chamber of seeing those videos over and over again that say, XYZ is going to cure your cancer, and it's like, okay, it's some herb out of, a bottle. It's like they start to believe it, and they might refuse traditional medical care that could really save their lives. And it's like that addiction piece of not opening. And I don't know, luckily my education taught me to think analytically. And throughout, my career as a student, even through grad school, I think there's a drop in analytical thinking and more just like, okay, well, this is what my little island of information is telling me, and I'm just going to follow. That's scary.
Well, and I mean, I think it's also like the delivery system. I think that part of the echo chamber kind of seduction is if people look like you and seem not crazy, you just go, we've gotten to a point in the society where people think all information is information, and they don't understand that some information is just bullshit. Yeah. And whereas when we were younger, people would say, oh, that's bullshit. People go, well, I mean, I don't agree with it, but maybe I should listen to what they're saying.
Right.
And it's like, I think that's created a level of permissibility that people don't want to censor bullshit when bullshit I don't know. I'm going to start sounding like a curmudgeon old man shit talking social media. So
I see where this is going.
I know. I see where it's going. I've been. There's a reason why my comms director is a Zoomer, because she's like, I have to look at you sometimes and give you the wink, JP. Like, you seem like a crazy old person on a couch. Sorry, on the front porch in the rocking chair, being like, get off my goddamn lawn. And I saw myself walking towards that rocking chair right now, and I was like, nope, I'm just going to get up, go back in my house, let those kids play on my lawn, and let Monet drive the wheel. I'm going to stop sounding like a curmudgeon old man. I resisted it. I turned around. I walked back in the house. So, but Aimee, I really appreciate you being with us today. I think that sharing your story will not just help people who are going through this, but it'll really stress to women and men. There's other small little group of men, but mostly women, that you need to do everything possible, whether it be your annual checkup or your periodic self-examinations, because months matter, days matter, and the sooner you could find that, the sooner you could get treatment.
Yeah, and that's right. And if anybody's listening and wants to reach out, they can always reach out to me through my emails on the state website. That's the fastest way to find me. But I will say, cancer survivors or people who are in treatment, sometimes everybody's treatment's different, right? It's an individual, unique journey. I'm not going to be an expert on all things breast cancer or cancer. So as a legislator, and you know this from experience, sometimes when people bring you the problem, like the group that with Dr. Matrana at Ochsner, like, we want to be able to cover these Medicaid patients and we can't. Like, I didn't know that before because I didn't have anybody that I knew who had that kind of treatment. And so, often I think people assume we know stuff that we don't know as elected officials. And it's like, you got to come to us and say, you got to help me pass this thing because, my grandmother or my brother or my husband or my wife, or my uncle or my partner, they experience this thing and we need help, Well,
what I always find interesting is that's how you define a good legislator versus a bad one. The ones who actually say, I don't know that.
Yeah.
versus the people who just kind of pretend. Because I mean, the reality is that I found as a legislator, and like you just said from your own experience, you're always learning. Like I sometimes like my wife or my colleagues will laugh at me because they'll be like, "How do you know about the planting cycle of like sugarcane? Like how the shit do you know that?" It's like, they were. I mean, you're laughing because you're like, "Yeah, I know too." It's you serve with all different types of people, and you get lobbied by all different types of groups. So you're constantly learning information, and that information is supposed to guide what we do because, like, we regulate everything at the legislature, but you don't know everything. And honestly, I feel like the area, specifically when it comes to medicine and medical treatment, when we start substituting our judgment for professionals who are treating these things, who are telling us, I need access to whatever to do whatever, when you start saying, well, I talked to my pastor, and my pastor said that, cancer's from God and treatment is bad. It's like, well, wait a second. You're no longer governing. You're not listening to the people that are actually have the cancer or treating it. You're listening to somebody who kind of has an opinion. And when you start letting those people guide policy goes crazy. Yeah. And the thing which you're going to experience far, far more than I did is what happens when people make bad policy and it kills people.
I know.
And that is, fortunately, in my time up there, we didn't do a lot of policy that killed people. But there's some stuff they're doing right now. When people die and their relatives show up, what are you going to say at that point? I mean, if you're one of the people that crafted the bad policy, who are you going to blame?
Yeah.
I don't know. Anyway, I Debbie Downer this episode down to the basement right there, Monet. Anyway, Aimee has a wonderful story, and I'm so happy as my friend and fellow Country Day alumni, because there's only like 5 of us in existence, that we're able to connect on that level. And I'm just so happy for you and your family that you were able to get detected early and that you're advocating for people to do that. And this is so appropriate that during Breast Cancer Awareness Month, we're going to put this out super rapid fast. Right, Monet?
Yes. Aimee, is there anything you want to plug before we wrap it up here?
No, well, I guess the only other thing is my menopause bill, right? Because I had that menopause bill that I just passed, and that's a big part of women's health care too. Because right, treatment for that was so underrated, not done. I mean, as one of my med techs tells me over at the doctor's group I go to, she said to me, "Oh, when we were growing up, you would just say, like, your mom would say, 'Don't talk to her,' like the neighbor down the block who was, in like, remember that old lady? Don't talk to her." Well, she's like, now you have more women who are in their 40s and 50s who've been practicing medicine and experiencing perimenopause and menopause themselves. And so there was this whole falsity about like hormone replacement therapy and treatment, because it doesn't have to always be hormonal related. There's non-hormonal. Right. So when passing that law was, again, a conversation with a doctor. And it is actually, October is also Menopause Awareness Month, which is not as well pushed as the breast cancer piece. But
it should be. It
should be. And so I'm really about passing that law, because what it says is no prior authorization required for perimenopause and menopause treatment for hormonal or non-hormonal. And one of the advocacy groups came to me, actually it was Bayer, because they're coming out with another treatment that is non-hormonal, and they noticed in the language of my bill that it was specific to hormonal treatment. And they were like, well, we would like to make sure this language gets updated so that if it's a non-hormonal treatment, it would be covered too. So, whether it's actually working, I don't know, because a few doctors are telling me some of the insurance companies are still denying, which they shouldn't be, because the law came into effect August 1st. But I think, it's a very important part of women's healthcare, because as you get older, you shouldn't be suffering. You shouldn't be feeling bad. There's all these side effects to menopause, and there are real treatments out there. And I'm thrilled for my daughters, because my oldest daughter is expecting her first baby in January. And I went with her.
Congratulations.
Yeah, congratulations.
To one of her Country Day grad also. She's a Katrina senior.
Hey, good people.
Another one.
Good people. Yeah. Good. So now we're up to 6.
Yeah. I went with her one of her checkups, she asked me to come. Her husband was out of town for work, and so I went. And I looked on the wall, and it was like about 8 or 10 women doctors in the practice, and I was like, oh, this is so different than my time as a pregnant mom. And I was so pleased for her. I was like, oh my gosh, these people are like around your age, and they're going to be there for you as you get older. So the fact is, I think there's more and more conversation coming out about menopause, and so it is totally intertwined in the whole spectrum of reproductive rights, breast cancer awareness, all the things that we deal with that are unique to healthcare and women's issues.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate everything, and we'll get this up as soon as possible. It's been a pleasure having you on AskJP, and I think this is really going to help a lot of people. Plus, I mean, I also got to shit talk the legislature a little bit, and that's always a positive, right, Monet?
Yes, right. It's always good content for us.
Always good content. So. All right. Well, thanks, guys. Have a great day.
All right. See you.